Every time prices rise, your freedom shrinks a little more. Rent, fuel, groceries, each month, each year, they climb higher. If you feel your salary doesn't go as far as it used to, you're not imagining it. You're silently watching the greatest transfer of wealth in history, a cycle that repeats every generation, because inflation doesn't just raise prices, it changes who the future belongs to. At the intersection of money, power, and history, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. For most people, inflation feels like chaos. Prices spiral out of control, savings lose value, the system seems broken. But for the powerful, inflation is the system. It's what keeps modern economies alive. It's how governments finance wars without raising taxes, how corporations shrink their debts, how the rich grow their wealth while everyone else struggles to keep up. So the real question isn't why does inflation happen? It's why is it allowed to happen again and again? To understand that, we need to return to a time when inflation was seen not as an economic goal, but as a national emergency. In the early 20th century, major economies were tied to gold. Every paper note was backed by a certain amount of gold in the vaults. That made money both valuable and limited. When governments made mistakes, they couldn't print their way out. If you ran a deficit, you either raised taxes or admitted failure. Inflation usually came after war or collapse, a sign of disorder. The idea that a government could intentionally create inflation was unthinkable. But then, everything changed. The Great Depression of the 1930 seconds shattered the illusion of monetary discipline. Prices fell, wages collapsed, banks failed, and the economy froze. The problem wasn't inflation, it was deflation. As money became more valuable, no one wanted to spend. Debts grew heavier every day. The economy imploded. That changed how economists and politicians saw money itself. After World War II, nations were drowning in debt. Some owed twice their annual income. They couldn't repay it, so they didn't. They let inflation do it for them. Throughout the 1950 seconds and 60 seconds, global debts quietly shrank. Not because countries got richer, but because money got weaker. The system learned a lesson. Moderate inflation could solve problems no one wanted to face openly. Then came 1971. President Nixon closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility into gold. It was meant to be temporary. It wasn't. From that moment, money stopped being a measure of value and became a tool of policy. Behind every dollar stood not gold, but trust. Inflation was no longer a mistake, it was part of the design. From then on, the game changed completely. Money could be printed endlessly, as long as people kept believing. Governments could borrow infinitely. Banks could issue limitless credit. And investors learned a crucial rule. When inflation is managed, the winners are never the savers, but the borrowers. Because inflation flips the logic of money. If you hold cash, inflation steals from you. If you hold debt, it rewards you. As prices rise each year, the real weight of your debt falls. That $1 million loan that once felt heavy feels lighter 20 years later. Meanwhile, your assets, your land, house, stocks all grow in value. Inflation doesn't just reduce debt, it increases wealth. That's the system's main purpose. The force that crushes the poor keeps the rich alive. Not a conspiracy, a science. Inflation is what keeps a debt-based economy from collapsing. Without it, every dollar would have to be repaid in full with the same value it was borrowed at. That would make the system implode. So governments, central banks, and corporations quietly agree. It's better for money to lose a little value each year than for the system to fall apart entirely. But who pays the price for this order? The answer is simple: the public. Wages never rise as fast as prices. Savings slowly erode. Those who don't own assets live on an invisible treadmill, running endlessly just to stay in place. Because inflation rewards ownership and punishes labor, saving is no longer a virtue, it's treated like a mistake. When your bank pays you 3% interest but inflation is 6%, you're not earning, you're paying a penalty for holding money. But someone who borrows at 4% to buy a house may double their wealth in a few years. That's not luck, it's design. Inflation doesn't distribute money randomly. It moves it upward. When new money enters the system, those who touch it first always win. Governments, banks, and corporations get to spend the new money while it still has value. By the time it reaches your pocket, it's already worth less. Economists have known this since the 18th century. It's called the Cantillon effect. Once it benefited kings and merchants, now it benefits hedge funds and central banks. After 1971, the logic of money changed forever. A system that once punished spending now rewards it. Rules that once disciplined governments now free them completely. Saving gave way to credit. Inflation became the invisible glue that holds everything together. In the 1,980 seconds and 90 seconds, this balance became perfect. Central banks promised price stability around 2% inflation per year, enough to fuel growth, small enough that most people wouldn't notice an invisible tax. But even 2% compounds into disaster. Over a generation, it halves a dollar's buying power. The difference is, while ordinary people see grocery prices double, the rich see their assets more than double. Because the rich don't fear inflation, they manage it. They have houses, companies, stocks, land. Their debts are fixed. Governments also love inflation. Public debt shrinks over time. That's why deflation, falling prices, terrifies them. Deflation makes the system fragile. Inflation hides the cracks. It pushes the pain downward. And banks? They love it most. Inflation creates a world where everyone must borrow. If prices always rise, saving money is pointless. People must invest, must chase returns, and every chase means more credit, more products, more fees. The entire architecture of modern finance, mortgages, bonds, stock buybacks, rests on one belief. Money tomorrow will always be worth less than today. The problem is, ordinary people can't play this game. For wage earners, income rises slower than inflation. For capital owners, wealth rises faster. For borrowers, it depends. Credit card debt is poison. A fixed rate mortgage is leverage. The rich know the difference. Most people don't. When the 2008 crisis hit, the system wasn't reset, it was reinflated. Central banks printed trillions, but didn't hand it to the people. They gave it to banks and financial markets. The result? Stocks and real estate hit record highs. Wages stayed flat. This process called quantitative easing wasn't a technical fix. It was a massive wealth transfer. Owners gained, renters stood still. It wasn't corruption, it was policy. Then came 2020. With the pandemic, governments finally gave money directly to citizens. Demand exploded, supply chains broke, and inflation hit its highest point in 40 years. History repeated itself. Stocks soared, housing skyrocketed, and those who had built wealth on cheap credit profited even from scarcity. For a moment, people said, inflation is back because corporations are greedy. But that greed wasn't new, it has simply become visible. Because inflation doesn't choose its winners, it amplifies whoever was already ahead. Different decades, same formula. Inflation is the oldest wealth transfer in human history, and the most respectable one. People blame greed, politics, or supply chains, but those are just symptoms. The real cause is structural. Time and again, the story repeats. In Weimar Germany, the middle class lost everything, while industrialists grew richer. In post-war Britain, debts evaporated while pensions vanished. In 1,970 seconds, America, the stock market stagnated, but real estate created fortunes. In the 2020 seconds, the richest 1% gained trillions while the average household fell behind. We built an economy dependent on credit expansion, and credit expansion cannot exist without inflation. The alternative isn't stability, it's collapse. That's why central banks don't truly fight inflation, they manage it. Their goal isn't to eliminate it, but to keep it barely noticeable. Because if inflation ever hit zero, growth would stop. That's why the war on inflation is just theater. Rates rise, markets panic, and just before something breaks, the direction changes. The elites know a little inflation is a small price for the system's survival. But beyond politics, inflation has a psychological layer. It doesn't just alter prices, it alters people. It teaches them to buy now, think later. It punishes patience, rewards risk. It turns saving into fear, speculation into hope. And so it creates the perfect citizen for a debt-driven world. Always consuming, never satisfied, always chasing a sense of security that stays just out of reach. At that point, inflation stops being an economic force. It becomes a philosophy of life. We call it growth, we call it prosperity. But beneath those words lies the same ancient truth. Silent devaluation, renewed inflation, another beginning. It's the cycle that keeps civilizations alive, makes banks indispensable, and numbs the public. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because inflation isn't random, it's how power manipulates time. That's why it rewards those who borrow, invest, and leverage credit, and punishes those who save and trust in money's value. It destroys those who still believe in stable worth. That's why the rich love inflation and you don't. Because to them, it's not theft, it's strategy. Each generation learns the same painful lesson. Money's value is never fixed. The only question is, are you one of the losers or one of those who understand who decides its value? Inflation didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of a world that wants everything now and pays for it later. The engine of debt, the fuel of empires, the blood of the system, and here we are. Without it, everything collapses. Deflation crushes debtors, kills banks, freezes trade. Inflation keeps the wheels turning, no matter who gets crushed underneath. That's the purpose of modern economics. Growth at any cost. So next time they tell you a little inflation is good for the economy, remember who benefits. Not the worker saving for a home, not the retiree on a fixed income, but those who own the homes, the companies, the system itself, because they know inflation isn't the flaw of capitalism. It is capitalism. In the end, inflation isn't a fire. It's oxygen. And in the world we've built, we cannot live without it. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. The answers are hidden in history.